Okay, let's think back for a second. Remember the absolute chaos of the early pandemic?
Oh, definitely. Unforgettable, really.
For so many of us, in our 20s, 30s, early 40s maybe, that economic hit was just as wild as the health stuff.
Yeah, the uncertainty was massive.
Jobs just disappearing overnight, and suddenly everyone's trying to figure out unemployment. It was intense.
Mm-hmm.
So today, we're going to unpack a bill that's actually making its way through Congress right now, and it goes right back to that time. It's H.R. 1156. They're calling it the Pandemic Unemployment Fraud Enforcement Act.
Right.
And our mission, basically, is to figure out what this bill really does, who it could affect, and why you should maybe care, especially if you were dealing with unemployment back then.
And the core of it, as we'll see, is about changing the rules for prosecuting fraud linked to those big pandemic relief programs under the CARES Act. We're digging into the actual text of the bill here.
Got it. So the CARES Act, that was the huge piece of legislation passed right near the start.
Exactly. It was that massive response trying to stabilize things when the economy just fell off a cliff. And H.R. 1156 proposes amendments to that act. So to understand this new bill, we probably need a quick refresher on the unemployment programs it targets.
Okay, yeah, good idea. The bill mentions three main ones from the CARES Act: PUA, FBUC, and PUC. Can you break those down simply? What were they for?
Sure. So PUA, Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, that was a big one. It opened up unemployment benefits to people who usually wouldn't qualify. Think gig workers, freelancers, self-employed folks.
Right. A lot of people in our age group fall into those categories.
Absolutely. Then there was FBUC, Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation. That was the extra flat amount added on top of state unemployment benefits each week, like that extra $600 early on, you remember?
Yeah, that was significant.
Definitely made a difference. And finally, PUA, Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation. That basically extended benefits for people who used up their regular state unemployment because, well, jobs were still incredibly scarce for a long time.
So these were all designed as lifelines during a really unprecedented economic shock.
Precisely. Critical support when millions lost their income practically overnight.
Okay, so these programs were vital. Now let's connect that back to H.R. 1156. You said it's about fraud related to these programs. What's the core change it's trying to make?
Well, the absolute heart of this bill is extending the statute of limitation.
Okay, the deadline for prosecuting.
Exactly. The time limit the government has to bring charges or civil enforcement actions for fraud connected to getting benefits from PUA, FBUC, or PUC.
And what are they extending it to?
They're proposing a new limit of 10 years. 10 years from the date the alleged violation or conspiracy happened.
Wow, 10 years. That's a long time after the fact. That suggests they might be anticipating or maybe uncovering quite a bit of fraud.
It certainly gives investigators and prosecutors a much longer runway. The bill actually lists a whole series of specific federal laws, specific U.S. code sections that this 10-year limit would apply to.
Can you give us a feel for what those cover? Like, what kind of actions are we talking about in plain English?
Sure. Let's see. It mentions 18 U.S.C. Section 371, which is conspiracy to defraud the United States. So that points towards potentially organized rings or schemes, not just individuals maybe making a mistake.
Okay, so coordinated efforts.
Potentially. Then you have things like mail fraud, Section 1341, and wire fraud, Section 1343. In this context, that could mean, submitting false information online for benefits, that's wire fraud, or maybe through mailed applications.
Makes sense. Using the internet or mail to lie on an application.
Exactly. It also includes Section 10128A, aggravated identity theft. That's a serious one, using someone else's stolen personal information, their social security number maybe, to claim benefits in their name.
Right, we heard stories about that happening.
We did. There's also access device fraud, Section 2029, which might cover misuse of the debit cards benefits were often paid onto. Bank fraud, Section 1344, could involve things like fraudulently depositing or cashing out employment checks.
So a pretty wide net.
It is. And it even includes money laundering statutes,
Yeah.
Section 1956 and Section 1957, suggesting they're looking at what happened after the money was fraudulently obtained, trying to hide its source.
Okay.
And finally, it mentions the False Claims Act and the Program Fraud Civil Remedies Act. That just means they can pursue these cases both criminally, seeking jail time or fines, and civilly, trying to recover the money.
So it covers everything from lying on a form to complex identity theft rings and laundering the proceeds.
That seems to be the intent, yes. To give broad authority to go after various types of fraud related to these specific pandemic programs for a full decade.
Now, you said 10 years, but is it retroactive. Like, what if the original deadline, 5 years or whatever it was, had already passed for a particular case before this bill becomes law?
Ah, good question. And the bill addresses that directly. There's an important exception clause.
Okay.
It explicitly states this new 10-year statute of limitations does not apply if the original statute of limitations for that specific offense had already expired before the date this new act is enacted.
So it can't revive old cases that were already timed out under the previous rules.
Exactly. It extends the deadline for cases where the clock is still ticking or for future investigations, but doesn't turn back time on cases already legally closed due to the statute of limitations expiring.
That's a really crucial distinction. The bill also mentions something about a budget offset, Section 3, I think. What's that about?
Right. Section 3 deals with funding. It basically rescinds or takes back $5 million in funds that were previously appropriated under the CARES Act and related legislation, but haven't actually been spent yet unobligated balances.
So they're clawing back some unspent money from the original relief effort.
Essentially, yes. It's a common legislative mechanism. We're redirecting this unused money, likely to help pay for the anticipated costs of the increased investigations and prosecutions that this extended 10-year window might enable, trying to make the enforcement effort pay for itself in a way, or at least not add new costs to the budget.
Okay, that makes sense. And if this bill does pass the Senate and get signed, when do these changes kick in?
Section 4 is very clear. The amendments take effect immediately on the date of enactment. So the day it becomes law, that 10-year clock starts applying, subject to that exception we just discussed.
And just for context, where is the bill right now? You mentioned it's moving through Congress.
Yeah, according to the bill's own documentation, it passed the House of Representatives back on March 11th, 2025. It landed in the Senate the next day, March 12th, had its first reading, then a second reading on March 13th, and was placed on the Senate calendar.
So it's basically waiting for the Senate to decide whether to debate it, amend it, vote on it.
That's the stage it's at. It's in the queue for Senate consideration.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our listeners, especially those of us who navigated that whole pandemic unemployment situation. Why should this bill, H.R. 1156, be on our radar, even if we did everything by the book?
Well, there are a few angles. First, as taxpayers, right?
Uh-huh.
Recovering potentially billions in fraudulent payments is theoretically good for public funds. Second, it's about government accountability. When huge sums are dispersed quickly in a crisis, oversight is crucial, even if it comes later. This bill reflects an effort to ensure that accountability. And third, even if you receive benefits perfectly legitimately, this legislation signals prolonged government focus on that period. It means investigations and audits related to CARES Act unemployment could potentially be happening for many years to come. Understanding the rules of the road, like this extended statute of limitations, is just, well, informative.
So it kind of keeps that whole complex period relevant for potentially another decade.
In a legal and administrative sense, yes. It underscores the complexity of unwinding these massive relief efforts and trying to ensure the funds went where they were intended. It's about the integrity of these vital support systems.
Okay, so boiling it down.
Yeah.
The Pandemic Unemployment Fraud Enforcement Act wants to give the government up to 10 years to prosecute a specific list of fraud offenses tied to those big CARES Act unemployment programs, PUA, FPUC, PUC.
That's the core of it.
But with that key exception, it doesn't apply if the original time limit already ran out before this potential new law takes effect.
Correct. That exception is important context. And there's the funding mechanism to support the effort.
Right. So that leaves us with something to think about. On one hand, you have the push for accountability, trying to recover taxpayer money lost to fraud. Seems reasonable, right?
Many would certainly argue so.
But on the other hand, what does it mean to have investigations possibly stretching out 10 years after a crisis that turned so many lives upside down? Think about the lingering uncertainty or potential burden that might create long after people have tried to move on.
It's a definite tension there.
It raises a question, maybe. What's the right balance between closing the books on fraud and allowing individuals and the system to fully move past a really difficult chapter? How do we best learn from and respond to these huge crises and the government actions they trigger? Something to consider as this bill makes its way through the Senate.